Well, good morning. One of the most contentious issues in California this year has been the issue of vaccinations. Joining us is State Senator Jerry Hill in Sacramento. To vaccinate or not to vaccinate, laws, who should be exempted. We've made it required that children be vaccinated after this last outbreak of measles. But this week in Sacramento, we saw a bill that I wanted to talk about because it's about policy and politics. The policy is exemptions, who should get exempted and how from having their children vaccinated, and the politics of that. There was a bill that made it all the way through the Assembly and the State Senate, contentious hours of debate, and at the last minute, the governor asked for amendments and completely changed the process. What's going on?
Well, it did change the process, and halfway through the process this year, as you know, the governor did get involved, which we like. We want the governor to kind of express his opinion so that when the bill gets at the end, he doesn't veto it. So he did put his opinion in that he wanted some amendments and changes, and he got those amendments and changes. And he said at the time that he would sign the bill if those amendments were there. At the end of the day, the bill passed the Senate, the Assembly, and he said, there are a few more things I'd like in that bill, which is quite unusual.
Okay, so let's take his, behavior out and say, because he's not the first governor to do something like this. But what it does is, for the public, you have this whole process that you go through where you hear parts of the bills. You have your state legislators like yourself who go through this process. And then at the 11th hour and 55th minute, he says, come on down to the office and let's do some more changes. I'm not sure the public feels real confident about that.
But he was elected as the governor. We do have three branches of government. He's an equal part of that solution, whatever that legislation is. So he does have a strong role to play. And you want your bill signed. So if you want your bill signed and you need that legislation, you think it's good policy, at the end of the day, you have to work with the governor. And if it's reasonable amendments, I mean, there is a line that's drawn in the sand. If he goes too far, then you can just drop the bill and not take it. But you do want to work with the governor, and he's very reasonable in that.
Was there any more issue more contentious than this one?
No, I don't believe so. I mean,
there were hundreds of people that went up to Sacramento to speak one way or another, and they were all outside the governor's office as well.
Well, they were, and in the gallery, and when we had our vote this week, they were in the gallery yelling and screaming. We had to adjourn and recess the session because we couldn't conduct business any longer because they were so with flags that they were flying upside down. And I went into the governor's office the next morning to talk about another bill, and we left, and they just chased us up the stairs, yelling and screaming, and we went back into session. But it was a difficult time.
Okay, so the governor then says, okay, I have these questions. So the option is, when you're in a situation like this, is you either go along with it or you say, no, we're not going to, and you throw the ball into his court. He would have been in a tough situation if Richard Pan, the senator authoring this bill, had said no. A deal's a deal. That would have put Gavin Newsom in a very, very difficult, because he would have become the anti-vaccine governor.
Well, he would have, but his request was reasonable. It wasn't that it was eviscerating the bill. It wasn't making major changes. He was asking for some grandfathering in the legislation, which wasn't something that changed it appreciably. So it wasn't an unreasonable request, and it makes it work better. The timing could have been a little better, and that would have made it smoother in the operation, because now we have to go through that all over again when the bill goes to the Assembly, comes back to the Senate, and it will allow the same disruptions that we've seen over the last few weeks.
So everybody gets another round to go
Everybody
through it.
gets another round to it.
But the interesting thing is, it was the public round. Now we're going to have the private round.
Yes, well, that's true. The private round is pretty strong too. For sure.
Let me ask you real quick: do you think more bills are decided in the chambers, or are they decided in the hallways as they move back and forth?
I don't know if I want to answer that, Phil, but both ways.
I do want to stick around because I do want to ask you about something we were previewing a little bit about, the gig economy bill. That has a huge implications for the state's economy, and a whole lot of people are trying to get exemptions from it. So I want to talk to you about the art of getting an exemption. It's big money, it's big politics. And State Senator Jerry Hill here to talk about another one of those issues that's got a lot of questions about it, probably more questions than answers. We're talking about AB 5, and that is the new definition of who's a worker and who's not a worker full-time in California. Who's a contract employee, who is a regular employee. There's a law going through the books right now that would what?
Well, the law would define exactly who is an employee and who is an independent contractor. We've had two forms of employment in California for many years defined by court cases, the Borrello case before, now the Dynamex decision from the Supreme Court last year. What it will do is define who those players are. We're looking at, in the 21st century, there may be a third approach. There may be a third form of employment, and that's within the gig economy.
But that brings into question and issue some of the most powerful forces up in the state legislature. You have businesses that say we want contract employees, whether it be an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, an Amazon delivery person, or a hairstylist, a part-time doctor, an architect. We have that. We have organized labor who says no. The more legal requirements we can have and the more benefits, then the better chance we have of organizing. This is a huge organizing issue for labor and a rights issue for labor. And who has the upper hand in Sacramento right now?
Well, right now, labor has the upper hand because the decision of Dynamex really puts all of the burden onto, or the definition that more people will be employees rather than contractors. So AB 5 is trying to carve out or create the opportunity for that third approach, or at least clearly define who is and can be an independent contractor. And that's what we're seeing. The problem is who fits into that. Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and the gig economy is having a difficult time with labor to carve out that opportunity for a third approach where benefits can be given, they can get organized, they can do other things, organized labor.
But you know, some of this just it's really kind of arbitrary. I mean,
it is.
I was checking in, and for example, you can't be, there's limits on how many, like a part-time freelance journalist for print versus a freelance journalist for broadcast. They're not defining them the same way. I've got independent truckers here who are delivering goods, but independent contractors who are delivering newspapers are a different thing.
Exactly right, and that's the problem, and that's why this AB 5 will not define it permanently. There will be bills next year, the year after, to try and clarify it a little better and make it work smoother.
Now, there's supposed to be a test about who is a worker and who's a contract worker. It's called the ABC test.
That's the new test.
Okay.
That's a tough test, though.
Right. But then we have the tough test, and then we have, I believe it's one state assembly person, Lorena Gonzalez, who's basically sitting there deciding who fits the test and who doesn't.
She is the author of the bill.
How does that, because she's authoring the bill, she's the one that finally...
Well, she can determine what goes into the bill, what amendments she will take, and what exemptions she can be granted in this. There are many exemptions, but there are many that did not get exemptions. The newspaper delivery people did not get included. Independent truckers, those people who invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in their cabs that they run and they travel around the country, and the state delivering things, they're going to be employees.
What is the dynamic that winds up with one state assembly person having the say on such a big swath of people?
Because the direction that she's been going, the direction of this legislation has been supported by and aided by organized labor in California. And they have been kind of directing how and who gets those exemptions and how the legislation is written.
I have to add to that, you know, I've spoken with some state assembly members, and I was surprised at how many of them didn't know what the bill was and actually were just sort of deferring it.
Well, and that is because it's a very complex bill. And I chair the Labor Committee in the Senate, so I've been kind of watching it a lot closer and trying to make sure that it does work and fit for some of those occupations. But it is not an easy process. It will not be done this year in total. There will be new opportunities next year as it comes out, and years to follow, because we can't. And those that will wake up on first of next year and they'll say, "Oh my God, now I'm been an independent contractor all my life, and now I'm an employee."
If I still have a job.
If I still have a job, right? And those will then have to be worked out as the reforms and more amendments come later on.
So, in the long short, we have a challenge, and the solution is to leave the door open for more challenges.
Well, that's the only way to solve it.
I guess that might be the only way to solve it. Is don't answer it. Just keep asking questions.
As long as we don't close the door to it, and that's what we don't want to do.